Well, gang, thanks for having me back. For those of you that joined us, Jeremy, when was that? January, February?
Yeah, it wasn't that long ago.
No, it seems
I
like a
don't mind double
lifetime
dip.
ago.
I don't mind double dipping for you, Sean.
I appreciate that. I genuinely do. You got to get me while I'm available because one day I'm going to be out jet setting the world, doing big things. But for now, I'm trapped in Oakland, California, in a place that looks a hell of a lot like a one-bedroom apartment. um, Gang, I really appreciate you having me here today. Jeremy asked me to come and talk to you about the Power Platform, more specifically Power Apps and Power Automate within the sovereign cloud, within the government tenants, the good, the bad, the ugly. So we're going to talk about all of those here, just to kind of give my perspective as an organization that was in GCC for 7 or 8 years. We did, for those of you that were in the session or that attended the user group session I presented a couple months ago, we did actually move out of GCC. We're one of those rare government organizations that isn't necessarily beholden to kind of the letter of, what a state or a federal organization is beholden to. So we were actually able to jump out of it. So I'm living the life, getting to play with all the fun toys. And I apologize for rubbing that in your face. But I think that it's created a unique opportunity for us here today to talk about the differentiation between the two, and more importantly, to talk about what's still possible. Because I think that it's really easy to fixate on the stuff that Microsoft doesn't make available to us. We are very much victims of their marketing scheme in that sense. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along. First things first, if you haven't met me yet, I'm genuinely sorry. This is the venue through which you do. My name is Sean Bugler. I'm a cloud architect with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission. We are a government agency based in the San Francisco Bay Area. Throughout this session, we're going to be talking about, as the title, you might have guessed, the good, the bad, the ugly. But much in the same way that you get that advice from your parents not to go to bed angry, we're not going to finish with the ugly. I think the last thing we want to do is wrap up a session with a pissing contest. So instead, we're going to flip this on its head. We're going to talk about the ugly first. We're going to talk about the things that don't just suck, but they're actively made worse by decisions by Microsoft.
Oh, no, I'm going to have to mute so I don't laugh the whole time.
Now we're going to talk about the bad, things that are disappointing but do have some understanding mechanisms behind them that either inhibit or make difficult the ability for Microsoft to make these things available. Not to say they couldn't, but is to say that there's where there's room for improvement. They've either started to take action or have already taken action. And finally, we'll talk about the good. And the good, I think, spoilers, is going to be an acknowledgement that there's still a lot we can do. There's still a lot we do have access to, and that there's still a lot of progress to be made. And we'll also take the good opportunity to showcase some of the apps that are active within my own organization's environment, that showcase that you really can still do great things, just like we were talking about a moment ago with even if I had Power Automate and I was only able to use the Microsoft actions, you can still do incredible things with that. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as we go. So really quickly, I just want to kind of take a step back and introduce MTC, the organization that I work on behalf of. This is our pretty office in downtown San Francisco that I have not seen in 13 months. So we're a metropolitan planning organization. We're the third largest in the United States. We're the planning, financing, and coordinating arm of the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area when it comes to housing and transportation. So we're planning for the next generation of trips. That means making sure that our policies are in place, that our infrastructure is in place to accommodate autonomous vehicles, flying vehicles. These are genuinely conversations that we have internally. But even down to bike shares and making sure that we've got congestion policies in place for vehicles as they're coming into major urban areas like San Francisco. Financing, of course, we funnel as an MPO federal and state dollars into the 9 counties, making sure that everybody gets fed, nobody gets fat, and ultimately coordinating, making sure that all owners mesh as best as possible. Now, when it comes to coordinating, that's uniquely challenging given the sprawl of the San Francisco Bay Area. 7.5 million customers, 9 counties, 101 municipalities, 24 different transit operators that were all trying to get to speak the same language. And that can be tough. And I don't just say all of this to say, well, what is it that my agency does? But I say all that in the lead up to, here's some of the products that we support: the regional transit card, the bridge tolling system, our 511 traffic monitoring system. We do all of that. We work with all of those people. We drive all of that vision with 360 employees. Do the math on a per employee to constituent basis, and the numbers are not favorable to having a substantial impact necessarily. And that's why the Power Platform is so important to us, because efficiency has always been in our DNA. And the Power Platform has really allowed us to hit the gas, so to speak, when it comes to building tools and processes that take people out of it as much as possible. I think that uniquely within government, we all know about sneaker-based processes where you've got to walk a packet from floor 5 to floor 6 across a campus. The Power Platform helps us to imagine a world where that's not necessarily a requisite, without having to go through the whole procurement process of a DocuSign or whatever. So, with all of that pretext, let's go ahead and get into the ugly. Here we're going to talk a little bit about where is government missing out, truly and honestly. One of the big areas that we've honed in on, and Jeremy, I'll be interested to hear your take on this one here. Contacting support is fundamentally one of the most frustrating things of being in the government tenants, because you have to be prepared to say the same thing 100 times, which is, I'm in a gov cloud. I'm in a gov cloud. I'm in a gov cloud. That's not relevant to me. I'm in a gov cloud. I know that's not available, but this is, I'm in a gov cloud. Jeremy, what's your experience on that?
Oh, absolutely. And it doesn't actually matter if you have Premier support either.
Nope.
Because the TAMs have the same system that for getting help for you. They just can emphasize it more, but it doesn't help you, right? Absolutely. In fact, in some cases, I found going to our Microsoft Enterprise Agreement holder got me better resolution.
Which is deeply unfortunate. It is painfully obvious that Microsoft does not have the infrastructure in place to accommodate these sovereign clouds when it comes to support. And uniquely so, the Power Platform doesn't even go through the traditional support ticketing system. It goes through the Power Platform Admin Center, and we'll talk a little bit about the Power Platform Admin Center in just a brief moment. But contacting support is a horrible experience. And I genuinely hope we're recording this, right, Jeremy?
We are.
Okay, good. I lead with this one here because I know that I can't sit through a 1-hour webinar that's been recorded, but I want to make sure that if they jump on and they're like, what do they talk about? This is the first thing they see, because this sucks. To that end, some advice: learn what they're asking for. A lot of times they're asking for logs. A lot of times they're asking for screenshots. A lot of times they're asking for a quick, 10-second video that emphasizes the problem. Just build that into your process. Get that information in place, because it's so satisfying to say, I've already given you that, in the same line that you're reminding them that you're in the Gov Cloud. So contacting support is something they wanted to lead with. This is undoubtedly one of the most ugly aspects of the Power Platform within the government tenants. Release schedules. Let's talk about this. As all of us here know, if you pay attention to the news cycle within the Microsoft universe, it all launches on commercial first. It doesn't matter what it is. I wish that there were some exceptions where we could say, no, this one had no implications whatsoever on the security side. This was just, they changed the way a button looks and they launched it all at the same time. That has never been the case. It will likely it will continue to never be the case. So let's talk about what we do know or have reason to believe is the case with respect to release schedules. Everything launches on commercial. The immediate next step is to look towards launching towards GCC. You will occasionally get teams within Microsoft that are progressive enough to try and launch on GCC and GCC High concurrently. The big differentiator, the determinant that tends to be the deciding factor as to whether they try to do it concurrently or whether they try to do GCC High DoD at all is the internet connected ability, the element of being connected to the internet in a non-Microsoft or commercial Microsoft space. So, we're talking about, sure, Twitter, like anything that's going to plug into Twitter, that's touching space that Microsoft just does not have control over. And so from a compliance standpoint, they're always going to err on the side of not flipping that switch, not enabling that functionality. You'll also get organizations, or you'll also get teams within Microsoft that actually try to stick to specific timelines within co-releasing. So launching a commercial and then turning their attention to GCC, GCC High DoD. The cycle internally for those that maintain a schedule or try to tends to be 3 to 6 months post-launch and commercial before GCC and occasionally GCC High come online. Once it's made the leap from commercial to GCC, the barrier to getting it from GCC to GCC High and DoD is substantially lower if it's not an internet connected functionality, again, meaning that it's not dealing with some third-party service that's non-Microsoft or doesn't tap into functionality that doesn't exist in the Azure government cloud. So we'll talk about some functionality that lines up with this here, but the release schedules are painfully non-transparent, as many of you know. The release schedules are entirely dependent on, at least initially, FedRAMP approval. And for those of you that are familiar with the process, know that that only happens a couple of times a year. Unfortunately, Microsoft has always been less than keen to talk about what's sitting on somebody's desk. Obviously, there are politics involved in that, but this remains one of the biggest challenges when it comes to decision making. It inhibits our ability to go to a CIO, to go to a CTO and say, yes, this is coming. Yes, we expect it to be in Q4. Now that's changed a little bit, and we're not going to just completely rag on Microsoft in all of this. Remember, we're in the ugly still. But there's a lot of room for improvement in these release schedules here. Jeremy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say one thing that some of the teams have done a really good job about, and that's actually putting GCC in the roadmap.
100%. Couldn't agree.
So that's that I would say that's over and above, triple, double, whatever they did within the last year. They've really improved that over COVID for some reason. So at least we have that. We can see their estimated date. Whether they hit that date or not, of course, is a whole nother thing.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I think my only note to those teams is to differentiate between GCC, GCC High, and DoD, because I've noticed that some teams just check all the boxes. They're like, oh, it's GCC, it's the government one, and they just check all of them, and we inevitably find out either the timelines are different or some functionality just isn't making it. Now, naturally, roadmap updates tie into this conversation here, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on this here, but transparency for government within Microsoft's official channels isn't the Power Platform strong suit. Now, I just put up this screenshot as kind of a placeholder, because for those of you who do actually try to keep tabs on the roadmap for the Power Platform, you know that they almost never, even on the commercial side, post updates to the Microsoft 365 roadmap. For unknown reasons, they really love docs.microsoft.com, where they are just as bad about not calling out what's coming to GCC, what's coming to GCC High. They do have dedicated pages for government tenants and some of the limitations therein. But when it comes to roadmap updates, feature updates, what's coming timeline-wise, and their wave releases, they rarely, if ever, in the actual documentation, call out government timelines. Generally, you have to look to the blog posts. All right. So let's talk about connectors. So for those of you on the off chance that you're unfamiliar with Power Automate, Power Automate is Microsoft's low-code automation platform. It's what allows them to integrate various services and tie them together in a way that lets them share data. Now, it's the genesis of the idea, the heart and soul of Power Automate is to connect any service, but its real value proposition in the commercial world has been to integrate and connect both Microsoft and non-Microsoft services, that you can have entire Power Automate flows that connect one non-Microsoft service to another non-Microsoft service, and there be no Microsoft element of it, barring the Power Automate flow. Now, as you get further down the pipeline in the government tenant universe, that mission changes over time. But we wanted to go ahead and start with just talking about how many connectors are available in each of these here, because this is ugly. Does anyone want to take a guess at how many connectors are available in the commercial tenant right now?
All of them.
well, you're right.
2,367.
Oh, wow. My kingdom for 2000. 471. I counted it just last night. 10 seconds to run through this. So there are 471 connectors, and that's Microsoft and non-Microsoft connectors in Power Automate in a commercial tenant. GCC comes up next at 137. GCC High, 31, and they're all exclusively Microsoft connectors. So we were talking just a moment ago before we started recording about DoD, and it has, I believe it's been formally announced at this point, that DoD, it remains on the roadmap for DoD to pick up Power Automate and Power Apps. It's likely that will be the same track they'll take, which is just exclusively Microsoft services. So if GCC High is any indicator, we're likely seeing about the same. Now, it's important to note here that there are Microsoft services that don't make the jump between commercial and GCC, and there are Microsoft services that don't make the jump between GCC and GCC High. One that comes to mind is Office 365 Group Mail. So for those of you that use Teams, you know that there's an Office 365 group backing that, powering that, and there's a shared mailbox backing that, powering that. And there are actions, there are triggers and actions that take advantage of specifically, not shared mailboxes just, although that connector exists, but actually Office 365 group mail specifically. That, for some unknown reason, has never made the jump from commercial to GCC, and likewise to GCC High. So there are instances where it's not even just, is it Microsoft or not? That's unfortunately not the barometer. Instead, it tends to be what areas of Microsoft are compliant, that have the appropriate endpoints. For the longest time, for those of you that have been in the government universe and working with Microsoft 365, you know that it took a really long time for them to get native integration between Power Automate and a SharePoint list or library to actually get that in the menu bar. And the reason being, among a million different reasons, was that the Outlook team didn't have government-friendly endpoints. That they were just completely hard-coded to use commercial endpoints, and so it was non-viable to create those integrations out of the box. The little things like that will also get in the way. So again, it's important to note that even within that, there's some differentiation between, is this a Microsoft service that's supported or isn't it? Jeremy, any thoughts?
I mean, there was a question in chat about who certifies the connectors, and that would be Microsoft. Microsoft determines what connectors are available in each of the 3 clouds, 4 clouds if DoD ever got some love. And I would say, based on the docs.com language, it just says based on popularity. So based on popularity in commercial, they make determinations of what they're going to push into the other clouds.
Right. That's 100% it. Yeah, Jeremy's right on the money. According to docs.microsoft.com, according to telemetry, whatever the most popular connectors are in commercial, those are, in theory, the ones that they make the effort to bring from commercial to GCC at a minimum. To that end, they do also call out that you can contact support and request connectors. They actually say that in the same line that they mentioned telemetry. I don't know how genuine that offer is, but for those of you that happen to be in GCC and there's something that doesn't exist, I know I've run into that myself, know that that is a potential venue. And we'll talk about some alternative venues as well. A reminder, we're still in the ugly. Power Apps templates in government tenants. So for those of you that are familiar with Power Apps, of course, it's their low-code app development platform. The templates themselves are built directly into the Power Apps portal. And what they allow us to do is spin up sample versions of Power Apps that emphasize what's possible using this platform. In the commercial tenant today, Microsoft makes available 35 templates. 35 that they do varying things from shout outs to suggestion boxes to meeting management to an out of office replier. And in most instances, those apps don't have any government dependencies. They don't have any special endpoint dependencies. They just require the appropriate connector. I don't know why they don't make those available. I'll tell you what I've done. When I was in GCC, I actually created a tenant, a developer tenant, which you can do for free, which gives you a commercial tenant. I've gone and I've created template apps in that dev tenant and exported them and imported them into GCC just to get access to them, just so I can break them open and take a look at the code. Because it's fundamentally one of the easiest ways to get started with seeing what's possible in Power Apps, to see what are the patterns and practices, where's the logic, what's a smart way to manage global variables across the app. So GCC, I was not able to confirm this number until just this morning, thanks to Jeremy. There are 9. Was that what you said, Jeremy?
9.
There are 9. So out of the 35 template Power Apps that are available in a commercial tenant, 9 of them are available in the government tenants. Now, to that end, I highly recommend that you check out a dev tenant. Not necessarily to export them and import them into your own gov tenant, but just to see what's out there. Just to see what Microsoft is using as kind of the banner applications to showcase what's possible using Power Apps, because they really do help you start to think through the right way to design something, the right way to implement logic, even just to showcase what components are available or icons are available or how you can combine them is a really, really powerful element of it. It's deeply disappointing how little Microsoft invests in providing templates. And this is true for Power Automate as well. I just didn't make a slide to shout at them about it. All right. We got the ugly out of our system. Let's talk about the bad. These are the areas where there's room for improvement. We understand that there are limitations, and we'll call them somewhat reasonable limitations, but room for improvement nonetheless. Yeah, this is a big one. And it's emblematic of a bigger issue within government tenants. The ability to embed a Power App within a Power BI report. You can see here just with this little interaction, as it's interacting with the Power BI report, the Power App in the bottom right-hand corner is dynamically updating. This is a really powerful thing. And bear in mind that it's all Microsoft through and through. This is symptomatic of a much bigger institutional problem, which is that for some unknown reason, government tier Power BI integrations remain limited to non-existent across the board. It's fundamentally confusing because there are so many areas where Power BI exists in a government capacity and cannot take advantage of Microsoft services where it can be used in a commercial capacity. Jeremy, any thoughts on this one here? I heard you go,
Yeah, well, I actually have some answers to that. It's not good answers.
Oh, good.
Well, so first of all, we quickly learned that the free version of Power BI, if you're in the government, like GCC specifically, is not in the FedRAMP environment. It's in the commercial environment, which means your Gov Cloud can't really connect to it from a connector or app perspective, and you practically you shouldn't be using it at all. But if you do what my agency did and you buy the Pro version, they do stand up a special Power BI tenant in a Gov Cloud, but that's the problem. It's a special Power BI tenant, and so therefore there are no connections back and forth between those environments.
And it's been that way for years.
Yeah.
It's just absolutely boggling. Yeah, no, my organization, we had, there was a period of time, I don't know if it's still the case, but where you could create a Power BI free account using your government username, and there's no migratory element. Not one, obviously, don't do that from a data residency standpoint, but even if you did, once you try to go straight, there's no capacity for migration outside of manually exporting these reports. So that's a fun one. Here's another one. And again, this one is emblematic of a much bigger challenge within the Microsoft universe. So AI Builder is a title that reflects a lot of different functionalities within Power Automate and Power Apps. Really what it is it's an encapsulation, there it is, of AI capabilities powered by the Azure cloud and delivered within Power Automate and Power Apps in a low code, no code capacity. So that's your business card readers. That's to be able to scan a document and have it extract the areas of a document that you need. Sentiment analysis, receipt processing, text recognition, OCR. These are all examples of AI capabilities that just are not available in the government tenant. Now, it's important to note that they're working on it, that this is slated to make it to government tenants eventually, because these are all powered by Azure, which is Microsoft. But for now, that isn't necessarily the case. And so it's important that we flag this as a huge area of opportunity for Microsoft to bring the AI Builder into the government universe. I mean, when you think about organizations that could really use and maybe don't necessarily have the expertise to bring some of these capabilities to life, I can't think of any organization the world over that could use that more so than government. We're left to our own devices, or worse, we're left to pull together a $2 million contract, or I'm sure it's more for some of you, so that we can get somebody to bootstrap these together using the Azure services directly, as opposed to this experience that already exists. We're back to Power BI for just a brief moment here. As some of you who operate in GCC and GCC High know, there is a Power BI connector. It exists. It just doesn't connect to government tenants. So I won't dwell on this one here, but I did want to bring this one back for just a brief moment here. That the Power BI integration is such a great example of just the confusion that exists with even it being a Microsoft product and whether there's support for it or not in the sovereign clouds. The Power Platform Admin Center was announced 2.5 years ago. The Power Platform Admin Center was introduced as a single point of entry to interact with most of the Power Platform, with the exception of Power BI. I imagine the intent is to change that eventually. So commercial tenants have had access to the Power Platform Admin Center for 2.5 years at this point, to some degree. GovClouds have access to the support element of it, and that's it. Now, every now and again, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong here, every now and again when I was in GCC, I would see functionality light up and then disappear. So every now and again, I would see where reports were supposed to go, and then they would disappear, or they would start to show up and then they would just not. So they're working on it, but this remains an area where government tenants are woefully kind of under-supported with respect to just basic administration of the Power Platform, because it does provide value far beyond what kind of the old legacy admin centers that aren't being developed anymore are supposed to do. Jeremy, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's bad. I can see some analytical reports that have rolled in recently, so I can see the number of runs, say, for Power Automate across my organization.
That's good.
But that could be because I used to have Dynamics. This is where things get really complicated. If your agency or entity who uses these clouds goes and gets Dynamics online, your Power Admins your Power Platform Admin Center actually gets capabilities from that integration that regular tenants don't get.
Gotta love it. Show me the documentation where they say that, Jeremy.
I got to be careful how I describe that.
Sure, no worries. Okay, we did it. We got through not all the complaints I've got. We would have been here all day, but we got through a lot of them. So I want to go ahead and take this opportunity to pivot the conversation to talk about the good, or more importantly, what's possible and how we've used it within my organization. One thing that I want to go ahead and lead with, there's still a ton you can do if you've got access to these platforms. You know, we said it at the very jump before we started recording here, that even if you just got access to the Microsoft connectors, even if you just got access to the unconnected connectors like conditions and apply to each and wait until or do until, there's so much that you can do with just Microsoft services here. It does occasionally require a little creative thinking, or as we'll talk about in a moment, a little bit of technical thinking, or diving into, unfortunately, a little bit of code where we would prefer not to in a low-code advertised platform. But it is still possible. And I think that it's really important that we acknowledge that we're not left with nothing at the end of the day in the government universe. So here are some things that are getting better. Jeremy mentioned one of them a little bit earlier. They are getting better about calling out GCC in regular old blog posts. When I started in working in government 4 years ago, that was not the case. You could not put a gun to Microsoft's head and say, tell me when this is coming for GCC. Is this coming for GCC? But they're starting to do it of their own volition now, which is awesome. It is such a marked change from where we were even a year ago, where they are starting to actively incorporate this, not just into their outbound communication, their marketing communication, but they're also starting to change the way that their processes actually consider new functionality. Microsoft Teams is a great example of new features don't come to fruition without considering GCC implications now. Now, that's not to say that everything that comes to Teams will come to the GovClouds, but it is to say that they're a part of the conversation from the get-go nowadays, which was not the case years ago. So we are seeing progress. And that also includes community resources. Microsoft has really ramped up their offerings for patterns and practices for sample apps. And we've talked about areas where they're not there yet. Power Apps native templates are a great example. But there are instances, whether it's the Crisis Center communication services, the Return to Work app, or the Center of Excellence, where they are starting to provide more accommodation for the challenges and limitations of GovClouds. So they are starting to get there. And, Jeremy is a great example of where Microsoft is really starting to lift up voices in the government universe. They're starting to apply resources, whether it's blogs or podcasts or news updates, and dedicated people to bring that information out there. Community resources are starting to really ramp up. And if we know anything about government, we know that it takes a lot of work to turn a ship, and Microsoft is no different. And if what we're seeing now is any indication, they're turning in the right direction. And the last one, of course, is timelines between feature releases. The average time, in the time I've been working in government, between a feature hitting commercial and hitting GovCloud was anywhere between 18 months to 24 months. For new features announced today, we tend to see the lead time anywhere between 3 and 6 months for GCC at a minimum. They tend to hit the roadmap quicker. They tend to actually hit the roadmap at all. So there's a lot of growth happening here. Jeremy, any platitudes or any positives you'd like to share on the Getting Better space?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think all three of those are the same. So as Sean mentioned, this user group that I host on a monthly basis, Microsoft encouraged me to do it. Their public sector person for tech community really pushed me, and their teams engineering lead for government really pushed me to put something in place. And then they've backed it up by either providing speakers for me or introduce me to people or coming themselves. So I agree with Sean that Microsoft has realized there's a gap here. They realize they can't change their entire ship and turn it in a new direction, but there are pieces of the ship who are working hard to try to do well by us and keep us informed. I put a link in the chat for the public sector Microsoft Tech Community. Really go look at the public sector blog. They put out at least a monthly blog now that says here's what's new in government, and they list it by the various clouds, and it's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a night and day difference. And could they be doing more in their official channels like the roadmap and on Twitter? Yeah, they could, but I'm glad and I'm heartened to see where they've stepped up. So, I know we're in the good, but I'm gonna have a little caveat here in a second. Power Apps, the Power Apps and Power Automate mobile apps, those exist. For all the features that we don't have, these do. Asterisk. The Power Automate app only supports GCC, and it only supports it on on iOS devices. Now, with that caveat, outside of the buttons, the flow buttons, there's almost no use case for it because geospatial isn't supported in Power Automate for government clouds anyways, for good reason. I'm sure all of you remember when I think it was Strava got in trouble because all the service members that were tracking their runs out in Afghanistan were mapping the perimeter of the base. But Power Apps, and by the way, this screenshot for Power Apps was taken this morning, and you can see here the specific call out for DoD, GCC High, and GCC. So we have the apps, and especially on the Power App side of things, that opens up a world of possibilities here. It has for my organization. The SharePoint Integrate menu is actually supposedly scheduled to hit all government tenants by April 2021, with the exception of DoD, pending release of Power Platform in general. But the fact of the matter is, the lead time between it hitting commercial and hitting GovCloud is about 2 months, which is awesome. For those of you that are unfamiliar, the integrate menu is going to be a roll-up of the Power Apps and Power Automate menu items, and eventually, supposedly, the Power BI integration that's coming to SharePoint lists and libraries as well. So the integrate menu is a great example of just this increasingly deep integration that exists even in GovClouds between SharePoint and the Power Platform. I really didn't want to put this one on here, but I'm going to because I would be disingenuous if I didn't say that I've used this because I've had to use this in the government world. Custom connectors. So we talked about the differential between commercial connectors, 471, and the next tier, government, 137. That's a huge jump. And there are features there are connected services that don't make the jump that we need, that either we've vetted through our own processes or we've accepted that they are going to be dealing with data that just isn't sensitive, and we're fine with that. In those instances, you can't just call up Microsoft and say, hey, we're fine with it. Although I do have it on a good authority that they are exploring, similar to the way that they've made available Teams apps on kind of a, hey, if you think you're fine, then you're fine basis. They are exploring that. There's no guarantees that's going to be the case. It would likely only be for GCC. GCC High DoD, where they may make available a larger catalog of the Power Automate connectors with kind of a hold harmless of, if you use it, it's not our fault, and your admins are going to have to enable it. Custom connectors allow you to bring in the APIs yourself, which is a lot of marble mouth gibberish if you're not familiar with code. I'm certainly not, I'll call it cloud native or code native. Like, I'm not as comfortable with code as I'd like to be. I know enough to be dangerous. I know it the same way I know Japanese, which is if you talk at me long enough, I can figure out what you're saying. 10 years, that's all I got from that. But the ability to bring custom connectors in is really powerful, not just to take advantage of services that aren't available in government, but are available in commercial, but to take advantage of services that aren't available in any of them. I've used custom connectors to integrate with the GCC admin center so that I can get daily roll-ups of what incidents are out there and things to that effect. Custom connectors are out there, but I do want to, of course, emphasize that it's distinctly non-low code. While there are a lot of really great resources out there, custom connectors are absolutely a heavier lift than I would personally like for the average user. Jeremy, any thoughts?
Yeah, the only downside to custom connectors is it requires the higher level licensing.
Yep, it is a premium tier.
It is a premium tier licensing, which it's difficult to sell when there's not much that works.
It's definitely one of those cart before the horse, it's a catch-22 of like, where's the value proposition? Like, I can't really give that to you until you let me play with it.
Right. So that is the biggest challenge I found in the government space, talking to many different organizations. They're not paying for the higher level tier. They're just taking what they get with the Office tenant, which does then further limit you, especially when you start browsing the internet looking for tutorials how to do stuff. And the first thing they do is, leverage custom connectors or some other premium functionality.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. All right. You guys have listened to me shout at you for way too long. Let's go ahead and take this opportunity to showcase some real world examples that are actually either in production or about to go into production within my own organization. I did have to cherry pick the apps that I'm showcasing here. None of them leverage partner data, so they're all used internally to some capacity. And areas where you do see data, it's either my information and, Google my name, I'm everywhere already, or they are using sample test data. So the first one that I want to go ahead and showcase here is one that it just came out of development, SharePoint document review and approval. We, like any good government agency, are just chock-a-block with committees And as we mentioned at the very outset of this particular one, we've got a lot of external stakeholders here. So that means that our committees are dealing with a massive amount of information on a rolling basis. I think we've got 51 different committees in some way, shape, or form. Bear in mind, fair reminder, there's only 360 of us. So the fact that we've got that many committees floating around means there's a ton of information being thrown at a select cluster of people. So we developed a Power App that allows us to funnel information that exists within a SharePoint list or a SharePoint library and display it nice and neat within this Power App. I'm actually going to go ahead and pull it up here. And then, Jeremy, were you able to get access to that Power App you wanted to show off?
I do have a Power App that's going to look less impressive than yours.
Oh, you're too kind. All right. So you can see here, one, I've taken advantage of some view formatting here. There's nothing that I've done here that anybody here on this call couldn't do. I copied code from some blog post, tweaked it a little bit. Here we are. So you can see here that within my test committee, I've got a handful of documents that are assigned to me. I can see that there's a deadline associated with them, and there's a little bit of supplementary information. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump into the mobile view. I'm actually really proud of this one. It's fully responsive, which means that you can look at it on a screen like this, or you can look at it on your phone and it looks just as great. That took way more math than I would care to admit. You can see here I'm able to interact with documents that have been assigned to me. I can see which ones are due. It's sorted by that. I can go ahead and open a file just by clicking that fun little button here. Close that. And I can mark this as complete. Now, for those of you that saw just a moment ago when we were dealing with SharePoint, you can see here, because I used view formatting and Power Automate, I was able to drop a flow button in here, which is something you can do in GCC High as well. So I can click on that button and get a similar call to action here. So why did we build the Power App as well? I was just talking about this yesterday with a couple of colleagues, and it is staggering how many executives work exclusively from iPads these days. There's so many of them. And unfortunately, there are a lot of things like that view formatting of flow buttons in SharePoint that just don't work well on tablets. So Power Apps, being able to take advantage of those touch APIs without you having to know how to maximize and take advantage of touch APIs is awesome. Oh, and naturally, of course, this is the time it fails. I'd like to go ahead and add this is about to hit production, so we're making some final changes to it. So this is a really great example of something that we've brought to life that makes a world of difference when it comes to working with our executives and trying to meet a specific organizational need, which is seeing exactly what I have in front of me on whatever device that I need right then, right there. Another one I want to go ahead and take this opportunity to showcase here is the Return to the Office app. Now, some of you may know that Microsoft made available a really robust Return to Office solution that had a Power App, that had Power Automate flows, that had an entire Power Platform solution package tying it all together, Power BI dashboards and model-driven apps. It was a lot more robust than what my organization needed. We needed something super lightweight that was going to allow people to, if they were going to physically go into the office, to complete an attestation, to complete a daily health check, and even to register guests that were going to be visiting the building. So from a design perspective, you'll notice that there are some visual similarities. Yeah, we took inspiration from what Microsoft put out there. This throws right back to the conversation we were having before about Power Apps templates and how making those available is so important because it gives us a North Star to look towards. It gives us something to look at and go, okay, I don't have to reinvent the wheel. I can build an app that looks great or looks good and know that somebody other than my dumb eyes have looked at it and thought, this looks okay. Once again, this is also one that is fully responsive using some fun math. So no matter what screen you're on, it's going to accommodate that appropriately. I can click on get a day pass here. I can choose the venue and I can complete my daily health check. So this is a really, really powerful one. And we're actually working on scaling this up to accommodate people being able to check out hot desks or hotel desks. So when we do start returning to the office, there's a really good chance that we're actually going to transition some of our staff to majority remote. And so to that end, making sure that we have mechanisms in place that allow people to check out a desk when they're coming into the office physically is going to be really important. And this app can help facilitate that. The last app that I want to showcase here before I close this out and throw it back to Jeremy to show what he's got is the alternative work request portal. So in a past life, I don't know if you're going to believe me or not, but people actually used to ask to get to work from home. And so naturally, we had a portal where people could request that. They could go in and they could say, yes, I'd like to work 1 day remote a week, or they could request a transition to a 980 compressed work reschedule. As opposed to creating another stupid paper form, we were able to build a Power App that accommodated that entire process, that accommodated submitting the request, accommodated the supervisor reviewing the request, making changes if need be, sending those changes back to the requester. They can accept it or not, and rolling it all the way up to HR. All of these apps that I've shown here are using exclusively Microsoft connectors. And that's why when I said earlier that there's still so much we can do with a little bit of creative thinking, there are still so many problems that we can solve that are just these systems, these platforms, these services not being exactly as custom as we need them to be. And that's really where Power Apps and Power Automate shine, is helping make those things make more sense to our users and candidly to help end run around end user training that we don't necessarily have the resources for. The committee packet portal is a great example. We probably could have done without this Power App if we were able to just communicate with the users and walk them through standards and expectations on opening a document, changing the metadata. But instead of doing all that, we've obfuscated it behind a Power App to make that experience feel very first party. And that's it. That's all I've got for you here, at least from a presentation standpoint. I'm going to throw to Jeremy because I know that he's got a Power App or two that he wants to show us. But I'm also happy to field any questions. I know we've fielded a couple of them as we go. But before that, I just want to say thank you for having me again. I really appreciate being able to share this with you. And if you have any questions, doesn't just have to be now. You're more than welcome to reach out to me on Twitter at SBGLR. You can find my email address on my website, sbglr.com. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm not always the person who has the answer, but much like Jeremy, I'm a sucker for meeting people. And so if I don't have the answer, I probably know who does. So please, if you've got a question or even just want to bounce ideas off of somebody, I love a Zoom call. I love a Teams call. Just let me pour a cup of coffee and I'll listen to whatever you got.
And it gives him fodder for his weekly Microsoft refresh sessions.
Yeah, that doesn't hurt.
So if you haven't seen the refresh show that Sean participates in with Matt Walsh, you should definitely check it out. I'm going to put a link in the chat right now. But it's very good. They do kind of a weekly show where they talk about what's new or what's happening or what they've heard about, and they're not afraid to say what they like or dislike.
We don't pull punches, as many of you saw when we kicked off this particular session. They need to know where they need to step up.
Yes, MVP certifications are at risk with that show.
For more reasons than one.
There was also a thing in the chat where somebody asked about how you get CISOs on board with apps and connectors and embrace the citizen developer mentality. Is that something you had to wrestle with in your organization?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of a two-part answer. The first is if you already have access to the Power Platform, it's so easy to throw together a proof of concept without investing a ton of time. The Power Platform is the 3D printer of process automation, because you can so quickly throw something together that meets a specific need or showcases what's possible. And I think when you're talking about getting CISOs or CTOs or CIOs, when you're talking about getting executive leadership on board, or even just your supervisor on board, no different than that old adage of show me the data. Show me what's possible. And don't ask them, hey, can I show you what's possible with this? Go build it. Now, obviously, don't tap into data you're not supposed to. Make dummy data where you need to. Use SharePoint as a data repository. I still use SharePoint as a data repository for like 99% of the stuff that I build. One, because I just cannot wrap my head around Dataverse. I'll get there eventually. But also because it's interacting with data that they can then go see and touch and understand how we're manipulating it through an experience that feels better. Because it's really hard to argue with better. Mm-hmm. And so show them better. That's how you get people on board. Now, that's not surefire. And if you don't already have access to the Power Platform, if you're in one of those organizations that has the tightest of fists on licensing for Power Automate or for Power Apps, you've got a more uphill battle. But that said, I mentioned before, dev tenants, you don't have to maximize live production data to show value. No different than we all still lean on PowerPoints to organize our thoughts. You can still create a Power App that showcases what's possible and use that to push the conversation forward. But I genuinely think inspiration is the most powerful element of this here, followed only by ROI, which is, I hate the acronym. I hate it. And I know that someone is inevitably going to say, well, we're government. We don't care about it. We spend the money. Anyways, that you can't beat saving time. And so if you can make the compelling argument of this is going to feel better, this is going to be a better experience, it's going to allow us to do things that would otherwise require a month of training or some heavy, intense development resources, that's a win. And I think that that's a really great place to start. And if that doesn't work, reach out to me. I will brainstorm with you. I have done bigger, dumber things.
I'll tell you, my agency did not want to turn on Power Automate or Power Apps. And let me tell you the secret to getting it turned on at your agency. Create an enterprise-wide process that is using Power Apps. Because the minute you do that, they have to turn the license on for everybody.
Oh, that's so good. I love it.
And so that is kind of my segue. I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. And I will show you the app that we did that with, a copy of it anyway. And then once again, it's not pretty, but it does the job. And so if you work for a federal agency, you're probably really familiar with the fact that most of us have to follow some sort of conference and event approval process. There's lots of regulations about it due to, the 20-year ago GSA parties in Vegas that caused us all now to have approval processes. And so our agency decided to do this in a Power App because we were not wanting to do anything. We've been leveraging InfoPath for years, and we're done with it. And so we've convinced leadership Power Apps was the way forward for InfoPath, and so there we go. Now we have a Power App, and custom development, of course, is more expensive. And it's very simple, right? We have a dashboard that shows up. It shows me all the existing events that are out there because maybe I want to attend an event that somebody's already got approved for the agency people to attend. Or I could submit my own new request. It's just another form within the Power App itself, right? Very basic. You can see here. I'll just create a test event test so you can see it actually works. I guess I should put it in some sort of recent time frame. Pick a date. So, pretty simple. Home, because we can't go anywhere. Test. And you submit it, and it will then get routed to somebody. It doesn't automatically show up here. So what I'm showing you here in this view, you don't see everything. There are buttons that are missing because we are doing a role-based security through a SharePoint list. Since we don't have Dataverse, we don't have CDS, we are leveraging SharePoint list data. And so we have in the SharePoint list, based on who you are, we actually have role-based security to say whether buttons should show up. And so there's a missing button here for supervisor, a missing button here for travel, a missing button here for finance, I think, and maybe our HR department. So they kind of stretch across here. But you can kind of get a feel. Like you can see here all the ones that have been submitted. And it's really, really simple. And behind it all, like Sean said, it's just a list. I like this. This was something they added recently where you can see how many people have already signed up for this event.
I like that. I really like that.
Yeah, that's just another bubble, right? That's just another button with text applied, which I never would have thought about that. That's a great idea.
Really clever.
So it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be special. And it does work. Power Apps does, in GCC at least, does work on phones. So we did enable this to be it is responsive and does show up on a phone. So anyway, just a quick demo there, just kind of show you an example of a real world app that my agency uses. We also have our exit form process. Every agency has exit forms and exit form processes. So, these are standard processes. In fact, I guess it's time to start posting these things to GitHub or something. We need to start figuring out ways for agencies to share these low code apps, especially those of us in the Microsoft space.
I couldn't agree more. I think that there's a lot of really great opportunities for us to collaborate a little bit more so on those niche use cases that do feel unique to us, to our special brand of bureaucracy.
That's right. Well, Sean, I want to thank you so much. Any questions? Anybody want to? We've been trying to keep up with the ones in chat. Any other questions? Just positive accolades.
I will accept all positive accolades. I do want to go ahead and add I appreciated the ribbing on user voice. Well deserved. What a joke.
That's right. Well, thank you, Sean. Again, we always look forward to having you visit. You bring humor in all that you do, which helps to take a bitter pill. So thank you so much.
I appreciate that. Real quick before I forget, I don't think it's been formally announced yet, but it does look like I'm going to be presenting at the what are they calling it now? The Collab Microsoft 365 Collab Summit.
The Business Application Summit?
No, June. It was SharePoint Conference. It's not SharePoint Conference anymore. I'll find it. If you follow me on Twitter, it'll be posted on there. If you check out my website, SBGLR, not Collab Days. You guys are going to make me look it up.
North American Collaboration Summit.
Is that it? Yeah, that sounds right. Wait, hang on. No, that's not it.
No. Gosh, there's so many.
It's in Disney. Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference.
All right.
So that is on June 8th through the 10th. It is a hybrid conference. It is the first Microsoft conference that has any in-person component since the world caught on fire. It's not a Microsoft official conference, but for those of you that have followed the Microsoft universe, Microsoft has always used SharePoint Conference and now the Microsoft 365 Collaboration Conference as a vehicle to announce things that, bookend Ignite. it's an opportunity to specifically announce that kind of stuff. So I will be presenting a Government is Automating and So Can You. It's a new reimagination of a previous session that I've done. So yeah, check that out. That'll be coming up.
Well, and if you go check out the YouTube show for Matt and Sean, they always have a link to upcoming conferences. So I imagine it's in that list as well.
It will be.
All right. Well, thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.
Thanks, gang.